Hey everyone, my name is Ash and welcome back to my channel. For today's video, we will be discussing music sampling. We'll get into the history of sampling, some of the reasons why artists opt into sampling, the drawbacks, and even the possible repercussions of sampling incorrectly. But before we get started, please remember to like and subscribe to my channel. Also, please leave a comment letting me know your thoughts on today's video, as well as other topics you would want to see in the future. Now, let's get started. So I've started indulging in some music that has come out in the past couple months. I've personally taken a liking to Megan Thee Stallion's song Circles. The upbeat background music and the woman's pitched vocals have truly been an earworm for me. Upon the song's release, I watched the Twitter timeline praise Megan for her use of Jasmine Sullivan's sample from her song Holding You Down, Going in Circles. This went along with her other sample of I'm Afraid the Masquerade is Over by David Potter in her song Shots Fired, and other samples she has used throughout her album and other works. Megan is just one of many artists to use samples in her songs. Another example, her management label head, Jay-Z, is known to have sampled in many of his hits and collaborations, such as in Paris, The Story of OJ, and much more. Even pop artists like Ariana Grande sampled old songs on her albums like Sweetener and Thank You Next. So this begs the question, what is sampling exactly? Well, according to whosampled.com, sampling is defined as the reuse of a portion or sample of a sound recording in another recording. Samples may comprise elements such as rhythm, melody, speech, sounds, or entire bars of music, and may be layered, equalized, sped up, or slowed down, repitched, looped, or otherwise manipulated. To give a little context, sampling in its earliest form dates back to about the 1940s. Two French composers, Pierre Schaeffer and Pierre Henry, were attempting to create unique sound collages from daily life sounds such as trains and mechanical noises. The practice was called musique concrète and provided a foundation for what we know as sampling. Eventually, this moved into artists remaking already popular tracks. For example, in 1956, music and record producer Dickie Goodman, along with songwriter Bill Buchanan, made a mashup of rock and roll hits to create the record Flying Saucer. In another example from 1961, James Tenney accomplished this by taking portions of Elvis Presley's song Blue Suede Shoes and rearranged them to create his work Collage No. 1. The term, sampling, was coined in the 1970s by the creators of Fairlight CMI, a digital synthesizer, sampler, and digital audio workstation. The act of sampling was popularized around the late 1970s into the 1980s as it started to show up in hip-hop. DJs would manipulate the vinyl records, replaying the breaks in music because people liked dancing to it. Cool DJ Herrick is said to be one of the pioneers of this, and the art was worked on by others over time. Another DJ, DJ Grandmaster Flash, would change turntable speeds and turn the record manually when he played. He eventually joined up with the Furious Five and created the 1980 single Freedom, which samples the song Get Up and Dance by the rock band Freedom. Nowadays, sampling has been rather normalized, with Megan, Jay-Z, and a bunch of other artists in and outside of the hip-hop genre sampling past songs for their next hits. If you're like me, you probably have an idea of what sampling is, but probably aren't aware of all the hoops you might have to jump through just to be able to sample. You see, early on, sampling wasn't a big deal because it was so new. Artists could just buy CDs with samples to create their own remixes. Eventually, artists and labels were beginning to crack down on this, and laws were soon established regarding sampling. For starters, artists have to pay two copyright fees, one for the owner of the music or the master recording, the other for the owner of the actual recording or the underlying composition. Then, there are royalty fees that they can make off the music, which can range anywhere between 15 to up to 50%. There can also be rollover rates, which are fees incurred depending on how many units were sold. Long story short, sampling can get pretty expensive. There's also a bunch of other rules that comes with sampling. Here are some main points. To start, you can't sample music without consent, and it doesn't matter how much of the music you use or didn't use. Using another person's intellectual property without their permission would be copyright infringement. Which leads to the next point. Your work is protected under copyright laws, even if unregistered. An article on medium.com states that the moment you take an idea and turn it into a song that you can play for someone else, your work is protected by copyright. Registering is more or less added protection, but highly encouraged, especially when it comes to lawsuits. The next point is that even if you aren't profiting or planning to profit off of sampled music, you are still infringing. When a song is registered with the U.S. Copyright Office, the artist is entitled to exclusive rights, such as the right to reproduce the work, the right to distribute the work, the right to perform the work, the right to display the work, the right to make derivatives of the work, and the right to digitally transmit the work. The second to last point is that copyrights last up to 70 years after the artist's death. And if there are multiple people working on the music, it's 70 years after the last author has died. And lastly, quoting lyrics in your song also counts as infringement. It infringes on the underlying composition copyright. However, it doesn't infringe on the sound recording copyright. So as you can see, there's a lot to keep in mind when sampling. So with that being said, why would an artist even want to sample in the first place? And what are the drawbacks or consequences of sampling, especially if done illegally? Now let's get into the pros and cons of sampling. When talking about the pros, you're usually talking about what artists get out of sampling. Well, to start, artists sample music when they want to create something new with an old song. By bringing in a familiar beat, it also brings in a sense of nostalgia. The listener goes back to a time and reminisces on the time of the original track, and then starts to associate those emotions to that of the new song. This also gives new life to an old song that might not have gotten it prior to the new song's release. Another reason why artists sample music is because it cuts down on production time. When making a new body of work, you're probably starting from scratch. And if you're starting from scratch, you're probably going to need more studio time. And if you need more studio time, you're going to end up spending more money. Therefore, by using a sample, you save yourself time and money on your project, as well as have a foundation which allows you to plan out the rest of your song. Lastly, sampling allows the artist to have resources that they may or may not have. This can include samples of instruments and vocals that the artists don't have the budget for or don't have access to. Now onto the cons or drawbacks of sampling. For one, when people hear a familiar song but don't recognize the artist, they might think that the artist is profiting off the work of others. They might even think that the sample was stolen. This is sometimes the case, but even when it's not, the public may still speculate. The next con is that the owners of the copyright may say no, or can be very nitpicky about how the sample is used. This con can be a pro if you're in the place of the owner, but for smaller or independent artists, this can be a make or break. If the artist and the owner can't find agreement on the terms of the sample, the artist might have to recreate their vision or scrap the sample entirely. The last point goes back to the sample process section, where we talked about the fees. For some, just the hassle of finding the copyright owners can get discouraging right off the bat. And even if you find the correct owners, they have to agree to let you use the sample, and you have to agree to all their terms. Then it comes time to pay all the upfront fees, as well as ongoing fees after your song is released, like we already discussed. Now, not all cases of sampling are the same. For some, the act of sampling might not even be that difficult, and it really all depends on what you're sampling or who you're sampling from, so keep that in mind. Before finishing up, I did want to briefly touch on the legal side of sampling. As you've heard in this video, sampling has changed over the years, and many legal issues have since come up. One example comes from an album called the Grey Album. It was created by a musician that goes by the name of Danger Mouse. This body of work sampled the Beatles' The White Album and combined it with Jay-Z's The Black Album. However, when the Beatles label EMI got wind of this, they sent Danger Mouse a cease and desist, which barred the release of the album commercially. However, it did get quite a lot of traction on the internet in response to the situation. This is just one example that shows that corporations that own copyrights are usually the ones that sue, and not the artists, which can cause issues. Going back to the Black Album, in 2006, Jay-Z was on the receiving end of a lawsuit of a one-man corporation, Bridgeport Music. Bridgeport sued for alleged infringement on Madonna's Justify My Love on Jay-Z's song Justify My Thug. This and other corporations doing this at this time won, and won in the millions. This is just one example of sample trolls who gather old copyrights and sue artists that use them for profits. You can honestly do a whole deep dive on those and others that take advantage of this and patents. It honestly can get really messy. From Lil Nas X to Robin Thicke, copyright and the laws that are in place are no joke. So please be careful out there, up and coming artists. The game is tricky, but I want to see you thrive. With that being said, I turn the mic over to you. What do you think about sampling in the music industry? Which of your favorite songs are sampled or are samples of other songs? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Honestly, this video has shown me just how nuanced the music industry is, and this is just one part of it. I now get why people sample without getting clearance. Doesn't make it legal, but I will say that I understand. It can get pretty pricey, and sometimes artists aren't even given the time of day by these labels or people who own copyrights, even if they're willing to pay. Plus, cases like Bridgeport just show that these artists can get taken advantage of in the copyright game. I can also understand why artists would sample. It could be a fun experience. Plus, I feel like it's kinda hard to be completely unique. The music industry is heavily saturated, and people like what's familiar, so your best bet is to give them something that sounds familiar. But I did want to say that samples aren't the end-all be-all. You can make a successful song without a sample. Will it be more time-consuming and cost more money? Probably. But what's more costly is the sample fees you may run into, or the lawsuit you could be faced with if you illegally sample. So stay safe out there, new artists. I'm rooting for you. But anyways, that's it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment down below letting me know your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!